All right, today I'm tearing into a Yamaha Virago 500 motor. We're gonna start by tearing down the top end. We've got the front cylinder head here, we've got the rear cylinder head with the rear cylinder here. We got the clutch on this side here, it'd be the right-hand side, oil filter, then on the other side we got the charging system, and that's kind of the order we're gonna go in. Top end, clutches, stator flywheel, bottom end, crankcase, transmission, output shaft, the prop shaft, and that yoke there. So I'm going to start just by pulling our head off here. We've got our front cylinder head camshaft is under here with a sprocket. Our cam chain tensioner is on the bottom side here of our front cylinder, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. We're going to use a lot of 5mm Allens on this motorcycle here. I'm going to pull these off. If these are extremely tight, I want to warn you, maybe don't use an impact to start it. Use a socket wrench, that way you can just get a little better feel for it. A lot of these have been fairly easy to pull off. I pulled a handful of them off just to get a feel and see if things were going to come apart easily or not. And these went fairly smooth, so I'm just going to keep on going with the impact here. Go ahead and pull this off. A lot of times you will get a little bit of oil coming out of there just because of the position that sits in there. There's your front cam chain tensioner there. To actually use this tensioner, you need to pull this 19mm bolt off of here, and then that adjuster will go in and out just like that. We're going to set that aside. And a lot of these parts we're going to mark, that way we know front or rear. Now, pulling that cam chain tensioner out, it's going to give us a little bit of room here. We're going to pull this front sprocket cover. Just, again, 2 Allen bolts to remove that. All right, we got the cover off there. That's a cam chain sprocket cover. We've got an O-ring there that seals that up. I'm going to set that aside. What the cam sprocket looks like here with the chain, if you can see that. We've got a bolt here holding the sprocket on. We're going to pull that bolt. That cam sprocket is going to pop off there. Then we're going to be able to push the cam sprocket down slightly, pull that chain off. That chain's fairly loose the way that it sits now, but a lot of times you won't be able to pull that completely off until you pull that sprocket. 14mm socket there to pull this cam chain up. Go ahead and impact that 14mm off. Now we can just pull that cam sprocket. I'm gonna let that chain drop. Be careful from this point on that you don't turn that motor over. You could potentially break that crankcase down below there. So just be mindful of that. We've got a couple Allens on top here. These are gonna be 6mm Allens on top. And those are pulled off. We'll turn our cylinder head here. We typically would have a motor mount on top, just like you do on the back one here. That's already been removed when we pulled this motor. Now, I've done other valve adjustment videos and stuff on this machine. You do not have to pull the motor to do those adjustments. Grab a 17mm socket here. Okay, cylinder head bolts are off. We've got one over here that I see. It's a 12mm. We're going to need an extension for that. It's right by that spark plug there. All right, got that one removed. Got all the cylinder head bolts off there at this time. All right, now a lot of times you can just take and tap up on this exhaust cylinder head valve there, cover there. You just take and pull that up just like that. That'll allow us to lift that head right off of there. Cam shaft is right underneath here. To remove that, 2 10mm bolts, then this has got a keeper here, you pull that out and just slide that cam right out of there. You may have to work it around your rockers there on either side. Set that aside, we'll pull that front cylinder. We've got a couple Allens here that we got to fish down. One here, looks like that's about it. Those we'll actually have to use an Allen like this to get down into. We don't have the longer Allens out right now. We've only got 2 of these that are going to need to be removed. One on the front, one on the rear. So you can see there we got a little bit of rust down in that cylinder. We'll inspect that. Before going back together, we've got our cylinder head gasket here. We'll remove this. You never want to reuse a gasket like this. All right, and then same as the cylinder head, you can take and just pivot that up a lot of times. Sometimes it'll stick on these cylinder head studs that run all the way through there. We'll take and pull this back guide up here, set that aside. We can get that to slide up. Sometimes our gasket will stay on the bottom here. It looks like we got about half and half. Our base gasket here stayed. Some of it came with us. So a lot of times that's what will hold us up. Your CM number is there. That is your engine CC size there. We'll go ahead, we'll actually hone this cylinder out. It's a little, got a little buildup there. It looks like this motorcycle sat for some time, but actually the cylinder and the piston look really, really good, except for a little bit of buildup there. So a quick hone will a lot of times fix that. We'll go ahead, I'm gonna turn this motor over now. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this piston off here. To do that, I'm gonna grab a clip or a pick and pull this circlip off. We're gonna take and push this pin out. We'll go ahead and pull that piston up there. We'll inspect it really good, and we'll probably get new rings for this one. But we'll measure it and make sure it's in good condition before we do anything. I'm gonna put that clip and that pin, keep everything together there for the front cylinder, and then I am going to go and pull the rear cylinder off. Everything is gonna be almost identical. I'm gonna show you that process. Cylinder head here, we've got 14 millimeter, so along with our cylinder head cover mounts. Camshaft, sprocket cover here. Gonna go ahead and get that removed. Okay, we'll set that aside. We've got our cam chain tensioner on this side here. I'm gonna go ahead and remove this 19 millimeter bolt just to show you what's underneath of there. And that is what the cam chain tensioner looks like there. You got a spring and you've got a rod running through there. You got a cat brass seal or this washer here, then the bolt, and that actual plunger part of it will push down in there. It'll come out when we remove those Allen bolts there. All right, that cam tensioner will pop out there. Now you can see what that cam chain tensioner does there. That spring and that shaft will push that in, goes like that. That cam chain tensioner isn't able to go out unless you pull that little lever on top here. That'll allow it to go back in. So as that tightens up, it tightens on that guide that runs down there, and I'll show you that when we get into this cylinder, and then it can't release and go back the other direction. So I'm gonna go ahead and put those back together again, just to keep everything together. That'll automatically push that cam chain tensioner post out there. Go ahead, now that we've got the cam chain tensioner out, we can go ahead and remove our cam chain. So to do that, I'm going to remove our sprocket, 14 millimeter bolt here. Spun that, we've got a plate on there, and then we can go ahead and remove our sprocket. I've showed you what that sprocket looked like on the camshaft on the front cylinder there. We'll set that aside. We're gonna go ahead and remove our two Allens here. Those are the larger ones, remember? Now we've got a 12 millimeter bolt over here by our spark plug here. Grab an extension. Now we can just take and pull our head off of there. A lot of times you can get your fingers in between those fins there and pry up. If you can't, there's a little bit larger fin on the front, on the back there. You can get in there, pry those up. We'll set that aside. We'll inspect that, those valves. Make sure they're in good usable condition before we go back together. There is a lot of times a little bit of oil that's going to be in those heads, so make sure you let that drain out before you set that on somewhere where you don't want oil. Our guide there, just going to be able to pick that up out of there. I like to keep the front and the rear separate. I believe these guides are identical, but just because it's easy to do, I'm gonna separate them. We'll grab our Allen here. This is the 5 millimeter that sits right along the base of the cylinder. We're gonna go ahead and remove that. Now this cylinder is ready to come up out of there. We'll pull that up. We've got an O-ring down here that kind of seals up that cylinder, that seals up this cylinder barrel here, because we do have our gasket still underneath there. That's a paper gasket. This is what they call the base gasket. Pull that piston circlip out now. Put my thumb over top of it, that way it doesn't go flying across the room. I also, if all we're doing is top end, I want to make sure we don't drop it down in that crankcase, so I like to just put my finger over top of it and take and push that piston pin out, and then keep everything together here. I'm going to take and put my circlip back in here, and we'll inspect this cylinder and we'll inspect the piston to see what all needs replaced here before going back together. A lot of times you can just take everything, look good just at a real quick glance. So a lot of times we'll just replace rings on there when we're going back together. Next, we're going to dig into the clutches here. I'm going to go ahead and pull maybe a couple sensors off here that are going to be in our way. I'm going to prop this motor up, and we've got our oil filter over here, and then we've got our clutch cover here. Clutch cover bolts are off all the way around. I've removed the oil filter cover here. Here's the oil filter. You can see there we've got the open end facing towards the motor. Sets in there. Make sure that that O-ring or this seal in here is good. Same as on this side here. You also have an O-ring on the cover here that seals up around the outside or around the inside edge. You want to make sure that your bolts stay in the correct order there. They're specialty bolts that center that cover there. Obviously, we're going to throw this filter away. There's no bolts down in here. We can actually take and remove this clutch cover at this point. We also have an oil sensor down here, 2 Allen bolts. We'll take and remove that. And I like to just get this out of there right away just so we are not getting this sensor here damaged when we're pushing this motor around. So kind of just a cover there, a guard. It catches a lot of dirt, unfortunately. When you get that sensor off of there, just a plug there. You got an O-ring that seals that up. We'll set that aside. And we're gonna go ahead and pull this clutch cover out this time. Grab a rubber mallet. You can tap a couple different places here. It shouldn't take a lot to break that seal free. And then you can just lift up on this cover. As long as you have all the bolts out, it should come right up out of there. All right, there's a clutch cover there. We've got a gasket all the way around. You want to replace that whenever you dig into this clutch assembly here. We'll set this aside. You see that this one here has a cover. This is actually just a false cover here. It doesn't actually seal anything. So having the crack in this outer plastic piece here isn't a big deal. We're going to set that aside, kind of let that oil, we're going to let that oil just drip over there. Set that clutch cover aside as well. We're going to go ahead and pull that clutch. Got our oil pump here. We've got our crank gear here. Primary gear is what that is. And then we've got our clutch here. Shift mechanisms behind this clutch. So got 10mm bolts holding this clutch on, 5 of them. Your clutch adjuster is right here. Check my channel. I believe I've got a video of how to adjust a clutch on this model. We'll go ahead and remove these. What I'm going to do now is remove this top cover here. And a disc or 2 may come up with it. That's fine. I try to just pull up as least amount as possible there. Set that aside. I actually take and put this clutch back, this friction plate back down in there. I'm going to grab a flat screwdriver. And a hammer here. I'm going to flatten this keeper. We'll grab a socket big enough to fit that. While I'm doing it, while I've got the hammer in hand here, I'm going to go ahead and flatten this primary gear keeper as well. This is just because these parts are spinning so fast and there's so much pressure on these, they put in keepers like this to keep that nut from spinning itself off of there. A lot of times you can tell if this motor's been apart before because they'll have one tab that's already bent up. You can see there that tab's already bent up on this side, but they flatten this side here. And a lot of times you don't get that spacer back into the exact same position there. So somebody's been into this before, which isn't a big deal. Okay, we'll go ahead and pull this. This is 1 3/16" nut here. Regular threads, so turn it counterclockwise to remove it. We'll go ahead and remove this one as well. I like to try to keep this from spinning, so I like to hang on to it. You can hang on to the clutch and that'll keep this gear from moving. The reason why you don't want this to move is because these cam chains are still down into that crankcase. If that motor turns over, binds these cam chains down in the crankcase, could break the case where that guide mounts on. So keep that in mind. All right, now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take and actually put this plate back on real quick while we're here. What this is doing when you adjust this clutch, you loosen this 10mm nut here, you screw in or out that Phillips screw. That's putting pressure on the ball, and there's a shaft that runs all the way through there. Putting pressure on just releases that clutch. If it feels like it's dragging or it feels like it's not releasing completely, I would adjust that accordingly. So we'll go ahead and put these back on. Looks like we're putting things back together. We're not. I'll show you why I'm doing this here in a bit. Now what I'm going to do is take and pull up on the actual clutch pack. There it is there. You've got your clutch basket that stays. If all we're doing is replacing this clutch pack here or clutch plates, friction or steel, no need to remove this basket, so you can leave that tied down there. This just removes that entire thing, kind of keeps it together. Now to remove this basket, you've got a washer on here that's got splines on it that actually has to line up perfectly with the splines that are on your transmission gear here. So that's why it doesn't just pop right off of there when I removed that larger bolt there. Go ahead and slide that up then you can take, at this point, and lift that basket up. Now what I do, take and put that keeper down in there. I'll set the friction and steel plates, that pack right down in there, keep that all together just like that. Now I'm gonna go ahead and remove the oil pump. We've got a snap ring there. Remove the snap ring, our plastic gear will pop right off there. Underneath there, we've got 3 Allens that we're gonna remove. Now we're able just to pull that oil pump out of there, lift that up. Looks like we've got our relief valve on the bottom here that comes with it. I'm gonna take and put this all back together here so we don't lose this snap ring. Now this gear is able to pull up. You've got a woodruff key that sits all the way through there, sits on this crank, and you wanna make sure that that stays together, or at least you know where that's at going back together. You do not wanna forget that, or your motorcycle isn't gonna go anywhere. We've got our shift shaft here. We've got our cam chain, our front cam chain here, and our front guide here. That's a 10mm. We'll go ahead and remove that guide. There's the front there, and then our cam. We're gonna flip this motor over. I believe we've got a snap ring on the other side that's holding this shift shaft in. We'll remove that. We'll pull that shift shaft. We'll also remove the stator and the flywheel, the charging system on this motorcycle, and then we'll get ready to split this case. We got the stator side here, the flywheel. Underneath here is where you would find top dead center. Remove that cap there. Remove these 2 larger Phillips here, the GIS bolts here. Looks like a little emblem here. I'm going to go ahead and remove this and show you. This is what you would use to turn the motor over to find top dead center. So remove these. Underneath there, you've got a seal, an O-ring seal there. And this is what you use to turn the motor over. 14mm socket here, and you want to turn it clockwise. So you can go ahead and remove that, and that'll tell you where you're at for top dead center. Now, to get into the charging system, you don't actually have to remove any of that. I just wanted to show you what that looked like underneath of there. Allen bolts all the way around. I'm going to start taking those apart there. Okay, we'll go ahead and remove this cover here. It's your oil pickup. So you've got your oil line that'll run through here. This has got a screen here. You want to make sure that that's cleaned out. If you locked up your engine or you've had a gear go bad, you definitely want to make sure and clean that out. Possibly replace it if you can't get it completely cleaned out, because there will be a lot of debris down in there, metal shavings. Those metal shavings will plug up that screen there, and you'll starve your motor for oil. So make sure and inspect that really good if you've had engine problems. We're going to pull this stator cover off here. There'll be a little bit of magnetic pull there because of the charging system. Also behind this cover, you'll see your In this cover here, you'll see your sight glass for your oil level. You want to make sure that oil is between those full and minimum and maximum marks there. Also, you have your gear pattern there. First, neutral, second, third, fourth, fifth. So check those out. We've got your charging system here, and there's your stator. Again, this is the other side of your sight window there. You've got your pulsar wires and stuff like that. We'll set that aside. And we have got your starter gear here. This is your idler gear. Just a small gear on this side, and then a larger tooth gear on this side. All one piece there, besides that shaft that'll slide back and forth. Again, flywheel here. Inspect these weights. I'll show you how to remove that. We've got our shift shaft here. We've got a snap ring that we'll have to pull on this side to be able to push that through the other side. I'm going to grab a flat screwdriver, just remove that clip at this time. That way, when we get this motor flipped back over, that shift shaft will be able to pop right out of there. 14 millimeter to remove this bolt here that holds this flywheel on. And again, I like to keep it from spinning. A lot of times what I'll do is grab a grease rag, spin that off. We don't want that motor turning over because we still have the rear cam chain that'll go down into that motor. So that bolt is off. All right, our flywheel puller here. I do sell these if you need them. I've got bolts here that'll slide right down in there. I like to make sure that these are long enough. Now, on this one here, you actually have to take your bolt, put it back in. I remove the washer off there. You wouldn't necessarily have to. Spin this back in, and I don't go all the way. You'd stay about 1/8 of an inch up, and put this puller on here. When we get these installed, these 3 bolts here, and we can take and run this puller down, and we'll run it right on top of that bolt. You want to make sure, keep an eye on that bolt, make sure it doesn't spin down into that flywheel, or it kind of defeats the purpose of running this puller in. Go ahead and tighten this up. You want to watch your fingers, so if that does pop up, it doesn't come up and slam against your hand. Now, a lot of times I'll take a hammer then, slam on the end of it, that'll pop that right off of there. So grab our 10 millimeters, loosen this all up again. And we're done with our flywheel puller on this motor. I'm going to remove this bolt. Now we can take and pull our flywheel up. Now be careful pulling it up. You've got a bearing in behind there. And it's got rollers in there that can pop out of place. So I like to try to keep those together. They're kind of a pain in the rear to get back together again. So most of the time what I do is I'll take this gear and put it back on that bearing. That's a one-way bearing, so it'll actually only spin one direction. And if that's not functioning properly, you want to make sure that you replace that bearing. Got a woodruff key also that holds that flywheel in place so that flywheel doesn't spin. We've got a rear cam chain guide down there, 10 millimeter. And you can see what I was talking about here. If this cam chain twisted down in here, it could break this case right there. So that's why I was telling you to be careful of that. Take our gut, slide it out of there. Put that with the rear cam chain part. Now we're going to take and remove our output shaft here. We've got a little cover here, 2 small Allen bolts that need removed there. We'll take and pull that cover up. We've got an O-ring sealing that one as well. You can see our bevel gear in here. This is one side of it. The other side is behind this spring in the shaft. And I'll get to that here in a bit. We've got a sensor wire here that goes down to a gear. I believe that's a gear position sensor there. Small Phillips to remove that. 3 tapered Phillips screws here. We'll get this cover or the sensor removed. There's a wire lead that'll go up to it. You can actually just remove that wire lead if you'd like, but I'm going to keep that all together. Pull that up. That is the gear position sensor there. We'll set that aside. You can see down in there you've got your shift drum, or maybe from your angle you can't see that, but I'm going to go ahead and remove these 12 millimeter bolts here. I've already loosened these. You can see here we've got shims in behind here. They do, a lot of times you'll want to take those shims out. They come with a certain number of shims from the factory. You can get smaller shims different sizes depending on what you need, but the reason why they do that is because as those gears wear, if your bevel gear stays the same, those gears are wearing, there's going to be more movement between them. If you take and move that shaft in, very, very small amount, that's going to go ahead and tighten that gear up. You want a little bit of movement there, but you don't want a lot. You won't be able to see the small amount of movement, but you do want to make sure that it's not completely tight. There's going to be quite a bit of drag on that bike as you go. So small amount of movement there. Be careful removing this because this is an aluminum piece here. Those break very, very easily. You can see there the shims just pop right up. There'll be some shims on the other side. You do want to make sure that they're equal on both sides. Okay, we got that removed there. Yoke and everything are going to come with it. I've done hundreds of videos on replacing U-joints on bikes and four-wheelers, so check those out if you're wondering how to replace this. Got a O-ring here that seals that up. We'll leave that all together there. Easy to put back together. We are not having issues with that. An inch and a 3/16 there. I'm going to have to use an extension to get that all the way through, and then we can actually take and remove a handful of these bolts holding this case together. We're going to get ready to split this. We will have to remove that gear to do that though. All right, we've got an inch and 3/16 bolt down in there to remove that transfer gear there, that bevel gear. We've removed that now. I wanted to be able to do that so I can get down in here a little bit easier. You weren't going to be able to see with the video. So what I did is just put something in here. You want to make sure that you don't damage any areas around there. But if you can take something in there, put some pressure on that gear so it doesn't spin. Otherwise, that gear is just going to freewheel in there. We've gone ahead and removed a couple other of the Allen bolts that were holding us in there. We've had a handful of them throughout this. Went ahead and got those pulled out. Now we're going to take a rubber mallet here and tap on the gears or the crankshaft there. And then as soon as you get it a good distance out, what I like to do is just set it down there, and we just take and lift that case apart there. I like to try to keep all the gears on one side or the other if I can. All right, while we're prying this apart, you will want to pay attention here. You've got your shift drum that'll hold you together. You don't have that in the correct position, so take and spin that so the stars align there. Once you get that to the correct spot, then you can flip it back over. Typically, if stuff is aligned, it's not extremely difficult to get this apart. Once you get it ready to come off of there, again, just try to pay attention to any gears or washers that come up with the actual case. All right, we can just lift that up out of there. Our crank will stay down in there. We've got our shift drum here. We've got a couple different sets of shift forks, and a lot of times these crankshafts will just come out all, just drop right out of there. So we've got our shift drum here, like I said. Shift drum. Shift fork set there. Another shift fork there. We've got our transmission there. So that is the crankcase split on a Yamaha Virago 500. If you guys got questions or comments, make sure and leave those below. If this video has been helpful, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video as much as possible to help others out. Thanks for watching.